You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in the 3CR Community Radio Studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. This week, we're going to talk about Sudan, and I'm very happy to be joined by Hiba, who's an organiser from Sawt Al Sudan and from Unimelb for Palestine. She's an excellent activist, speaker, and brilliant all-round woman. Join me in welcoming Hiba. Welcome, Hiba.
Thank you, Nasser. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, Hiba. I want to talk about Sudan. A lot of people don't know what's happening. They hear about it. I know when you've spoken at our rallies, yourself and Mohammed, we've endeavoured to platform yourselves. And we talk about not just Palestine, it's Sudan, it's Congo, West Papua. It's about all peoples that are being oppressed. Why don't we start with a 101 on Sudan? What's happening?
Yeah, it's been going on for a while. You know, Sudan has been going through a genocide. A lot of people oftentimes will say, it's a silent genocide, but myself and many others have said that it's definitely not silent, but it's one that the world often just tends to forget about. And maybe because of the normalization of suffering of, Black people, especially, but also just people of color. Yeah, so Sudan has been undergoing a civil war of some sorts between the RSF and the SAF.
Let's talk about the acronyms. RSF is?
So the RSF is the Rapid Support Forces and the SAF are the Sudanese Armed Forces. And when you look at these acronyms or when you look at these two sides, like you would think one is the government, it's being represented by the government, and then the other one is, militia or the people of Sudan, as one might imagine. But this war it's an external war to Sudan. It's being supported by external actors like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, even Egypt, and they all benefit from what's going on in Sudan right now. They benefit from the displacement of Sudanese people. They benefit from the civil unrest that's been going on in there. So it's basically I just reject the notion that it's a war between Sudanese people and it's one that the people of Sudan have started between themselves. It's one that's motivated by outside sources.
Outside players are?
Yeah, so UAE.
United Arab Emirates, so don't go to Dubai.
Yeah, boycott Dubai. I don't want to see
boycott Dubai, absolutely.
I especially for Muslims, let's please leave the Dubai behind. We don't need to go there. And yeah, so one might ask what can Dubai, for example, get from Sudan? They're gold. Sudan is rich in gold, and the UAE benefits from that as well as petrol as well.
It's about resources then?
Yeah, it's about resources, and I'd always encourage people to go and visit our Instagram page, Sawt Al Sudan, because we've put out guides to direct people onto how to engage, with what's going on and how to boycott. So we've got the BDS movement, for Palestine, boycotting, divestment, and sanctions. We've got something on a smaller scale for Sudan as well, and it's mainly lists out airlines that people shouldn't use, and petrol stations, even for us here in Melbourne, petrol stations that we should not be going to. 7-Eleven, for example, is one. Caltex is one, for Sudan and Palestine.
For Sudan and Palestine. The UAE doesn't just supply weaponry there because they just want the gold. They're getting their weaponry, of course, from the West. Go back to the split. Talk to us about what happened to Sudan and where we are now with Sudan and South Sudan.
This all started in 2019 after Sudan's like previous president, Bashar, sorry, Bashar, that's Syria, al-Bashir, after his demise, where the Sudanese Armed Forces, so SAF, basically launched like some sort of coup on Omar al-Bashir after like months and months of Sudanese people being on the street, like protesting for him to resign. What happened after then was what we now call like the Khartoum like massacre that happened in 2019, and we then see like a split like in Sudanese armed forces between two leaders, Hamid Burhan and Hamidetti, causing a split, and we see Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, where he became the leader of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and Hamidetti became the leader of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. And that kind of like that split then takes us to present day 2024 of the ongoing war between basically two greedy, violent men fighting for like leadership and causing conflict and massacre and genocide all over Sudan, being backed up by external like agents who continue to benefit from
the resources. So is the war actually in South Sudan as well as Sudan?
So the war in Sudan, not South Sudan.
No, not in South Sudan. And the reality is, the same groups that are talking about genocide in Palestine, there's genocide in Sudan.
Yeah. And I think like that's the thing, right? So like in 2019 here in Melbourne, like, there were conversations with in the Sudanese community, because obviously there's like a difference of view as well between who people want to support and whatnot. But we saw people take to the streets, and in 2020 when we had the COVID lockdowns, people also held like smaller scale like protests. And at that point, let's face it, a lot of people did not take to the streets for Palestine before October 7th, as they've done like now. But we've been speaking about Sudan, and we've been speaking about Palestine for a really long time. Like, it's not a new phenomenon. It's really great to see people angry and want to take action. But what we've also seen is that it's become like a one cause issue, like where people just think it's Palestine and nothing else. But like, no, our struggles are all intertwined. Palestine, Congo, Syria, Sudan, the Uyghurs, we're all in this in a connected struggle. We have the same external actors that benefit from the genocides and from the wars that they cause in our countries. And so we've been obviously we've spoken at a few Palestine rallies since 2023. In 2024, that was how Sawt Al Sudan was also formed. We just saw a real need for some a Sudanese voice in Australia, because we like that. There was no space for Sudanese activists to really come and organize, and we've been trying to organize since last year. As you'd know, it's really hard trying to engage people and to keep them engaged sometimes when they don't have a personal stake in the cause. So trying to appeal to people's humanity. Really trying to stress the fact that it's all one struggle. If you abandon Sudan, you abandon Palestine. If you abandon Palestine, you abandon Congo.
That intersection connects everywhere. And if you look at those players that are funding the UAE for resources, and the same people that are funding the war in Congo, it's about resources. In the Congo, it's about the metals, etc., that end up in electric cars. In Sudan, it's about gold and other minerals. And behind the UAE is the US and the UK, our great imperial buddies. The real impact, of course, always is on the innocent men, women and children. And aside from the toll of the war, there's also challenges with famine and food and access to medicine, etc.
Yeah, we've seen news by Amnesty International, for example, calling the genocide and the hunger in Sudan being one of the worst in the world. And multiple reports, in fact, since the Amnesty report has come out, we've seen a huge amount of displacement. And like you said, the people that end up suffering are the innocent. It's always the men, women and children. And it always makes me I was laughing in a way, because I had this conversation with someone once where they were just so confused. I was why would the UAE or Egypt or Saudi Arabia really what would they benefit from Sudan? What do they have to offer? And I'm oh well, they're gold. And they're like, well, Sudan is not exactly rich. Like, where's their gold? Like, even before, like, the UAE or like Egypt, all these countries like had a hand to play. Where was like the gold? And I'm like, well, when you control the resources of a country, when you prevent them from upscaling themselves, just like we see like in Palestine, just like we see in Gaza, they are unable to help themselves. They can't progress. So they're always reliant on these like external countries or like agencies to keep them afloat. It's the same question of, will people be like, well, why doesn't Gaza have like a power plant? Why is there like build their own like electricity? Well, it's because Israel prevents them from doing so. I always remember that conversation when
it's a very naive, paternalistic, colonized voice that says that. France has, I think, the third or fourth largest gold reserves on Earth, but not a single gold mine. That's colonialism. That's what it looks like. Recently, in some African states, there's been a real quick ascent and move for decolonization and kicking out the French, and in particular in Burkina Faso, they've kicked out the French. Not only kicked out the French and sent their military packing, but also nationalized the production means, and they are now producing gold for Burkina Faso people, not for their French overlords and French multinational companies that were paying a pittance to the workers and taking all the profit offshore. So this is exactly the situation in Sudan, and exactly the situation in all parts across the world, in the quote-unquote underdeveloped world, where we should actually be calling it the exploited world. This is the case in the exploited world, where countries like France and Belgium, etc., go to former colonies and have created the infrastructures in those places and the businesses in those places that ensure the extraction of value is taken offshore to the colonial master and not to the indigenous people.
Yeah, like you said, that's basically what we see happen in Sudan and in Palestine. And so, yeah, whenever someone does not think like Sudan is wealthy or that we have anything to offer, I'm like, well, why are they so interested then?
If we've got nothing, leave.
Leave us.
Leave us alone. There's no question they should just leave us alone. From the perspective of, somebody who's just listening now, who's never known really what's going on in Sudan, we go back to the 2021 coup. We've got these two generals post the coup. We've got the two generals who want to, in a power sharing agreement. The two generals, and I love the Arab generals, they always, have so many badges and things. They decide that they're going to have a civil war because they each want to have power. Who's supplying the other general? The Emirates are on one side, and who's supplying the other side?
So, for example, for Burhan, his clearest and strongest allies have been, for example, Egypt. Where we've also seen with Hamidati, his strongest allies have been the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. And we've also for example, we've seen the UAE be involved in other wars in the region as well, for example, Libya, where I was born. So, I really have a thing against the UAE. I feel like they would never let me fly there, if I ever decided.
And in the Yemen, I mean, they are, just a regional bastard.
Yeah. So those are I would say the biggest supporters of each side. Yeah.
And we should go backwards from that. The UAE and Egypt are both supplied by the same military-industrial complex, which is the United States. I imagine most of our listeners are not capitalists, Hiba, but we should just run this very simple analogy. If you owned a cow and you milked her every day and you created milk and you sold that milk, you bought some hay, fed the cow, milked her again tomorrow, and whatever was left you bought or traded for other goods, etc. If you have a cow, you have not killed people with that cow. Forgive us vegans and or animal liberationists, where this is a metaphorical cow, please. But if you're a weapons manufacturer and the products you supply are actually bullets and missiles and tanks and airplanes, etc., you actually need somebody to use that stuff. Otherwise, you've got to close the factory down. That's the military-industrial complex. People are going to use milk every day. So we can know with certainty that we can buy some more grain, milk the cow, sell the milk, buy grain, milk the cow. If you make bullets, if somebody's not using the bullets you have to close your company
Yeah,
down.
shop.
You've got to close the shop down.
Yeah.
And so when you extrapolate that, the military-industrial complex is invested actually in the misery of humanity. And then you extrapolate that, what is their business model? Well, their business model ideally, is black and brown people killing black and brown people.
Yeah.
Because that's not newsworthy. Nobody cares what's happening in Sudan. Nobody cares what's happening in Congo. In Syria today, it's on fire again. Nobody cares. And that's number one on the business model. Number two on the business model is, white people killing brown people because, democracy. And, the least best example is white people killing white people, but at least we're making money. And that's, Ukraine and Russia.
Well, white people killing white people is usually like mental illness. That's what it's framed as.
Oh, it's a mental illness only on a small level here, but on a
troubled.
on we need to report dividends to our shareholders at the annual general meeting this year. We need, the sort of, $60-80 billion the US has sent to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Listeners, we're joined by Hiba from who's an organizer with Sawt Al Sudan and Unimelb for Palestine. We're talking about Sudan and the civil war there. You said, Hiba, that you were born in Libya, so you're already 2 dislocations from home. Maybe tell us a little bit about your personal story.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think for me it has to go even a bit further. My parents are from Eritrea, but their families were displaced like during the war there, and for some of them they fled to Sudan. Now, I say I'm like Eritrean Sudanese, and that's because my family has like deep connections to Sudan even before the war in Eritrea. But that's all like my family has ever like known. That's all my grandparents have known and their grandparents have known. But to also be born in a country and to be displaced from it, when you have that connection, it's really hard. And for my parents, that was their experience. So never been to Eritrea. I don't have any family or connections left there. And Sudan was really like, our home, like our country. My parents, migrated to Libya like some 50 years ago now, maybe from my dad. And he's built like a life there. And in 2011, just about after the Arab Spring, we were full forced to leave again. We were not Libyan. We didn't really have any rights in the country, especially after after the war has broken. People were without citizenship were targeted, and that landed with us being in a refugee camp somewhere between Tunisia and Libya for a year.
How old were you then?
Yeah, I think I was 11. I was 10 or 11. Yeah, until Australia, picked us to come here. But that was part of like efforts by the UN to relocate like refugees or people who basically had nowhere to go. Yeah, back to not back to, but like people who had nowhere to go to different countries. So some people were picked to go to, Norway, some to the US, and some came to Australia, and were part of a very, very small number of people that were settled in Australia.
I've been speaking to Hiba from Sawt Al Sudan, the voice of Sudan. Next up, a music break. This song is called Asli Ana Falastini, My Origins Are Palestinian. DJ Deens Music is a blend of Arabic, South Asian and global rhythms, creating high energy sets that are as dynamic as they are memorable.
قلبي عمره ما بينساه اسمه هواه وانا قلبي ما بينساه اسمه هواه شمسي انا الحرية ما بحني راسي لمية حبة رياح شرقية سجل انا عربية بعرف اصلي انا
was Asli Ana Falastini by DJ Deens, a British Palestinian DJ based in Sydney. Now back to Hiba and colonialism. You know, I talk to people all the time about colonialism and what it looks like and the manufacturing or the artificial states. And if you look at a map of Australia, it's very easy to see just colonialism at work. And colonialism at work is just how perfect the borders are between Western Australia and the Northern Territory and South Australia. It's a straight line. Between South Australia and the Northern Territory, it's a straight line. Between the Northern Territory and Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, it's a straight line. The only natural quote-unquote border is Victoria, New South Wales, because it's the Murray River. In the world, most borders of nation states, and remembering that nation states are only a very recent construct, past 100 or 200 years, 100 something years. If you look at Africa, it's very much looks like Australia, as does the Arab world. Eritrea, which sits south and east of Sudan, shares very many straight borders with Sudan. And it would not be crazy to suggest that 100 years ago, where there was no Eritrea and there was no Sudan and there was no South Sudan, it was all just land that rich white people drew lines on and said, this is for my daughter and this is for my son, that your experience wouldn't have been one of exile, but just one of transition as you moved through a landmass that was African as an African.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that for a fact, the tribe that I come from, Bani Amir, it's one that's shared between Eritrea and Sudan. We exist on both lands. But, I often do reflect on that experience of displacement, and when I'd always think about am I ever going to have a place to go back to or to call home? Because as much as I would love for Australia to be my home, at the end of the day, I am a settler on these lands. And, I believe, if I was to ever have the opportunity, I would love to go back, to Sudan or to Eritrea or to Libya. But with all the displacement and with all the trauma that also comes with exile from one place to another, and not being able to go back for such a long period of time, it creates that. Yeah,
well, it's a dislocation. I've talked about it many times. These white colonialists that draw these lines, and suddenly you're talking about your tribe that actually sits over what is now Eritrea and what is now Sudan. But it used to be just your tribe, and these was your ancestral lands. And you moved with seasons, or you moved with hunting, whatever it might have been that saw the village. And it might be that the village actually was just, or the town was there, and they just drew a line through the middle of it. Suddenly, brothers became different passport holders. Sisters became different country holders. And that dislocation is arbitrary, and it's defined by somebody in a palace somewhere in Western Europe. And the pain of that, how it actually extrapolates itself when you talk about, Eritrea to Libya, Sudan to Libya to Australia, settler here, is that we want to have the choice to go back to, but to what? To where, to when?
Yeah.
And what does it look like? And that diaspora experience removes us from the experience of living our true culture, our true self. And the way it manifests itself as you become entrenched as a settler is I can take my children to places I went to school, etc. This was my favourite park when I was a kid. But I could never do that with my father. And my father could never do that with his grandchildren. And so there's a dislocation. And so we are forced to find some way to participate, assimilation, social cohesion, quote unquote. But that disconnection is brutal, and it's compounded for yourself with 4 dislocations.
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm so passionate, and although very tired about speaking up about this. And I know my story is only one of many. I was fortunate enough to be able to be with my family and come here, but I think about the millions of Sudanese people that can't. I think about my family members who are displaced all over Sudan, and those who are displaced now outside. with just minimal resources to get by, especially during Ramadan. Like it's such a blessing, one that's bittersweet, to be able to, break my fast today with my family. But I know that, I have like family members that are not able to enjoy what I enjoy. And if it was within my capacity to help everyone back home, like I wouldn't know many people feel that way. But that's why it's important to show up, like when we call for fundraisers or when we call for mutual aid or when we call for protests. It's, it's not something that like we like enjoy doing. I know I don't enjoy, holding like fundraisers or like going to protest, but I know it's necessary and I know it's what I need to do. Me coming here and being settled in Australia, I don't want to be the model minority. I don't want to just build like, like for myself. I want to speak up for, those who are not fortunate enough to be picked by the UN, the refugee camp between like in the borders of Libya and like in Tunisia. Because there's some that haven't, and they're still there. But I'm here, and I think it's just really important, like, to keep using my voice and to like amplify these issues. And obviously, with that being said, to also like always keep at the forefront of my mind that as a settler, I also like owe a duty to First Nations people here, for their generosity and for their acceptance. I know like there's a lot of like mob that stood by Sudanese people, that who've offered support, and it's important that we just do the same. And I think I always have to put this reminder out because, like we're always stronger when we work together. But when we divide ourselves into, it's only about Sudan or it's only about Palestine, we lose people, we lose resources. I know we're all exhausted. Like since October 7th, like how many protests have we attended weekly, monthly? And we're still going. And and we've only been able to go for so long because we've had, not just Palestinians like organizing like the protest, but we've had mob, we've had like, Sudanese people, we've had like so many other like oppressed people just come and rally together to do the work. Yeah, I don't know. I can speak about this for so long and I can keep going, but I always just like say like, I want people to engage with us and to engage with us like not from, because they take pity on what's happening to Sudanese people. I refuse that. I think Sudanese people are one of the strongest people. We've endured so much. I want people to engage with us because they stand for justice, because they refuse to see people suffering and to know that like we have a hand to play in the suffering of those people. And especially like, and we're talking about Sudan, but like at the University of Melbourne, and as a student from the University of Melbourne, I know that my university has a hand to play in the suffering of Palestinians. I can't, I can't stay silent on that. No matter what repercussions we have faced in the last few years, I know it's just like important that we keep pushing back. So yeah, just keep talking, keep engaging, keep donating to mutual aids. Like it's one of the most important thing that, we can do. If you can't show up to protests, if you can't post, if you can't, hold conversations, if you can't be involved in direct actions, the least you can do is contribute to mutual aid and fundraisers. Because, $5 go a long way. Someone who has nothing.
Thanks, Hiba. You've been joined by Hiba, who's an organizer with Sawt Al Sudan and Unimelb for Palestine. Hiba, how can people find you on socials and stuff?
We are Sawt Al Sudan on Instagram. That's SAWTALSUDAN.
Fantastic. We'll put a link in the podcast. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember there's never been a better time for a free Palestine and a free Sudan.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.